Namaskar दोस्तों, myself Dr. Sushant, and in the continuation of my last video, today I will be discussing one important topic from the subject anatomy for the medical student, that is joint. Arthrology. What is arthrology? Arthrology is a science which deals the study of the joints. So the first thing, what is the basic definition of joint? And what is the proper definition of the joint? So the basic definition of joint, that is, joint is a basically junction between the two or more than two bones or cartilage. Why cartilage? Because cartilage is also participating in the formation of joints. As you already know that the articular surface, which is basically making a joint with the another bone. So the articular surface is covering by a piece of cartilage. Which type of cartilage? Hyaline type of cartilage, right? So that's why the proper definition is, yes, the joint is a basically junction between the two or more than two bones or cartilage, because cartilage is also participating. What is the example in which joint more than two bones are participating? The best example that we have, that is the wrist joint. We normally call it a wrist joint, and in anatomy we also call it a radiocarpal joint. So in this joint, radiocarpal joint, we have three bones participating. What are those bones? One, that is the radius bone, and there are two carpals bone. So in general, the three bones are participating in the formation of wrist joint. Sometimes more than fourth carpal bones is also participating during the deviation of the hand, right? So that's why the proper definition will be, the joint is a junction between the two or more than two bones or cartilage. So this is a very basic definition of joint. Now let's classify the joints. We can classify the joints on the two various bases. What are those? The first, that is the functional classification, and second, that is the structural classification. Functional classification, that means the classification on the basis of the function of the joint. The classification on the basis of the degree of mobility. So what is the function of the joint? That is the mobility, right? So in functional classification, we can have the three options. The first option, that suppose this is a one bone and this is another bone. The two bones are making a joint, right? And we have put some fibrous tissue here. So in this condition, what will happen? There will be no movement. So such type of joints, the two bones are making a joint, but there is no movement, immovable joints. So this type of joint is known as synarthrosis, S-Y-N, synarthrosis. So this is a one condition, okay. In the next condition, what will happen? Suppose this is a one bone and this is another bone. Both bones are making a joint, and in between the bones, we just put a small piece of cartilage. So what will happen? There will be very little movement, very slight movement, and this condition, this type of joint is known as MP arthrosis. What is the example of MP arthrosis? We have the vertebral column. So between the two vertebra, we have a disc that is known as intervertebral disc. So we can have the very slight movement, very little movements. So those type of joints will be known as a which type of joint? MP arthrosis. We can classify the joints on the basis of the function, and this will be known as the functional classification. On the basis of the function, on the basis of the degree of mobility. So this is a functional classification. In the functional classification, we can have three options. The first, that there is a one bone and this is another bone. Both bones are making a joint with each other, and in between the joints, we just put a fibrous tissue. So in this condition, there will be no movement, immovable joints, which is known as synarthrosis, S-Y-N, synarthrosis, right? What are the example of synarthrosis? Can you give me the example? Yes, we have the sutures in this region, in the skull region. So we have the various bones, like we have the occipital bone, we have the frontal bone, we have the temporal bone, we have the parietal bones. So in these bones, they are basically making a joint with each other, right, with the help of a fibrous tissue. So in this condition, there is no movement, immovable, right? In the same way, we have, what are the other example? The other example, that is the gomphosis. That is, yes, in the socket, the root of the tooth fixed in a socket of the mandible and maximal, right? So this is known as the gomphosis. So this type of joints, we do not have the any movement, and this is known as, yes, synarthrosis, which is totally immovable. In the next category, we can have the different option. Yes, there is a one bone and this is another bone. Both bone are making a joint, and in between we just put a small piece of cartilage. So what will happen? There will be very little movement, very slight movement. What are the example? We have the vertebral column. So between the two vertebra, we have a small disc, and this is known as the intervertebral disc, right? So with the help of this small disc, with the help of this small piece of cartilage, we can have very slight movement. So this type of joint is known as MP arthrosis, AMPI, MP arthrosis. And in the next category, what will happen? This is a one bone and this is another bone. In between the two bones, we have a gap, and gap is filled by a fluid, with a fluid, and this fluid is known as the synovial fluid, which is secreting by the inner layer of the capsule of the rear joints. So in this condition, what will happen? We can move because there is a cavity inside the joint. So due to presence of the cavity, we can move both the bones, freely movable joints, like here, like my shoulder joints. Definitely I can move in 360 degree my upper limb. I can move my upper limb in 360 degree. So this type of joints is freely movable. These type of joints are freely movable. That's why this is known as the diarthrosis. So in the functional classification, we have the three category. One, immovable, no movement, known as synarthrosis. In the second category, we have very slight movement, that is MP arthrosis. And in the third category, the freely movable joint, like a shoulder joint, we have the fluid in between and we have the cavity. So this is known as the diarthrosis. So in the functional classification, we have seen the three types. Now let's go to the next classification, that is the structural classification, which is more important. The structural classification, that means on the basis of the shape of the joint, on the basis of the structure of the joints. And in the structural classification, again we will have the three types. What are those types? So in this category, we have three types. The first type, that is the fibrous joint, like in our skull region, fibrous joint. So there is a no movement, like synarthrosis. Fibrous joint, gomphosis and syndesmosis. Syndesmosis, there is an unfamiliar name. That's why the competitive exam love to ask this type of question. Like if you take an example of the syndesmosis, gomphosis, okay, the root of the tooth fixed in a socket, that is gomphosis. These have the various joints in the skull, that is the sutures. They are known as the sutures, plain suture, sagittal suture, denticulate suture. We have the variety of sutures. And there is one unfamiliar name, that is the syndesmosis. What is syndesmosis? The joint between the two bones with the help of interosseous membrane. So this is my radius bone and this is my ulna bone. So if you see the radius and ulna, both are making a joint with the help of a membrane, and this membrane is known as interosseous membrane, right? So this type of suture is known as, which type? This type of suture is known as, yes, syndesmosis, right? So in the fibrous category, we have the three: gomphosis, sutures, and the third, that is the syndesmosis. In the next category, we have the cartilaginous joint. The cartilaginous joint is again in turn divided into two groups. One, primary cartilaginous joint, another secondary cartilaginous joint, right? So the primary cartilaginous joint is temporary in nature, and the secondary cartilaginous joint is permanent in nature, right? In the next video, we will discuss about the primary and the secondary cartilaginous joint in details. The primary cartilaginous joint is also known as synchondrosis, whereas the secondary cartilaginous joint is known as symphysis. And in the last category, we have the different variety of synovial joints, like we have the plain synovial joints where the articular surface will be plain and the synovial fluid will be present. This type of joint will be known as the plain synovial joint. Then we have the hinge joint, we have the pivot joint, we have the bicondylar joint, we have the saddle variety of joint, and we have the ball and socket type of joints. So in the synovial joints, we have the different variety, we have the different type on the basis of the structure of the joints, right? So today I have discussed the basic of the joints. What is the joint? What is the basic definition of the joints? The classification of the joints. We have classified on the basis of the function, that is the functional classification, and I have classified on the basis of the structural classification. And in the structural classification, again 3, that is the sutures, that means fibrous joint. In the fibrous joint we have the sutures, gomphosis, syndesmosis. In the cartilaginous joint we have the primary and the secondary cartilaginous joints, and finally we have the different variety of cervical joints. So thank you very much for watching this video.